So we're going to get started. We're still letting people into the wait room, but we figured we'd get started. So good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us and then there were 3 lesbian bars in New York City and across the country. My name is Amanda Davis, and I'm an architectural historian and the project manager of the New York City LGBT Historic Sites Project. I'm also moderating tonight's panel discussion. Before I introduce our 3 panelists, I wanted to give you a brief overview of our work. The project was founded in 2015 and tells the history of LGBTQ people and events through buildings and landscapes. You're looking here at over 400 pins that represent sites from the 17th century to the year 2000 in all 5 boroughs of New York City. Many of these are grouped into over 30 curated themes that you can find on our website, such as activism before Stonewall or the Harlem Renaissance. We like to say we're making an invisible history visible by telling the often untold story of the LGBTQ community's influence on American history and culture. And the pins on the right give you an idea of the kinds of sites that we record. We also advocate for official landmark protections for some of these historic sites because we see this as a way to further solidify the importance of including LGBTQ history in the broader narrative of American history. For example, we've met with the Landmarks Preservation Commission, which is the city agency that oversees official landmarks in New York, so that we could share our research with them and suggest which historic sites should be on their radar. This slide shows the results of those efforts. All of these sites are official New York City landmarks. Most recently, the Lesbian Herstory Archives in Brooklyn was landmarked last month, and Julius's Bar in Greenwich Village will very likely be landmarked tomorrow, which is exciting.
Yes.
And thank you to those of you who have sent in letters of support for these so that the commission hears that this history matters and that they should keep going to designate more LGBTQ landmarks. We hope you'll also check out our website and follow along on social media. We also have a bunch of Zoom talks on our YouTube channel, like these 4, which are related to lesbian history. Cheers Queers, the past and future of NYC's lesbian bars, 1970s lesbian activism and community, 20th century lesbian life in Greenwich Village, and progressive reformers and lesbian lives. And just to put tonight's panel discussion in context, I wanted to share this site, the Sea Colony, which was a popular lesbian bar in the 1950s and 1960s. The floor plan at right was drawn by Gwendolyn Siegel, one of our past graduate student consultants who I know RSVP tonight, so I hope she's here. The map is helpful in understanding how the space was used back then. You see the building entrance and bar at left and a back room at right for dancing. The hidden nature of this back room was important in the 1950s and 60s because police raids were frequent and same-sex dancing was illegal. When the police entered the building, the bartender pushed a button so that a red light went off in the dance space, alerting women to stop dancing to avoid arrest. Many lesbians have spoken about bars in this period as being revelations because they were the only places to meet other lesbians. But at the same time, they were very aware of the dangers of being arrested or physically attacked, or having to adhere to strict guidelines, or dealing with bar management that was mafia run. And this last slide shows other lesbian bars and similar spaces on our website grouped by decades to show that lesbian and queer women nightlife experience today very much has a history that stretches back well over 100 years and probably earlier than that, but these are the buildings we've documented so far. And now for tonight's panel discussion. The NYC LGBT Historic Sites Project is pleased to partner with the Lesbian Bar Project to host a virtual talkback for the 3-episode series of the same name, the Lesbian Bar Project. This series, which is available on Roku, features Henrietta Hudson in New York City, Boycott Bar in Phoenix, Arizona, and the Pearl Bar in Houston, Texas. If you haven't had a chance, you can stream it on Roku for free. In the 1980s, there were roughly 200 lesbian bars in the United States. In 2022, there are fewer than 25. In New York City, only 3 bars catering to a lesbian and queer women's clientele are in operation. But as the Lesbian Bar Project notes, this isn't a sob story. Lesbian bars are much more than spaces for drinking and socializing. Their very existence has been and continues to be a political act. We're fortunate tonight to have three panelists who are well-versed in lesbian and queer women's spaces. First, Erica Rose is a Brooklyn-based filmmaker who, along with Elina Street, co-created and directed episodes for the Lesbian Bar Project, produced and distributed by Roku Brand Studio, and presented by Jägermeister. Erica and Elina established the project at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic to celebrate, support, and amplify the remaining lesbian bars in the United States. Since then, they've fundraised close to $300,000 for these bars. You can learn more at lesbianbarproject.com and follow them on Instagram at Lesbian Bar Project. Cassandra Grant is an educator, activist, and a founding member of Salsa Soul Sisters, the oldest Black lesbian organization in the United States. Cassandra has dedicated her life's work to uplifting and empowering others through her unwavering community involvement and service. From her passionate and soul-searching work with Salsa Soul Sisters to her protesting of systemic and systematic racist practices within our society and at lesbian bars, Cassandra has fought to create and hold space for lesbian and queer women and families of color for decades. Jack Jen Giesling, PhD, is an environmental psychologist, researcher, writer, and academic coach and gender inclusivity consultant. Their research examines how queer and trans people produce, sustain, survive, and thrive in urban and digital environments. Jack is research fellow at the Five College Women's Studies Research Center, where he's working on his second book, Dyke Bars, Queer Spaces for the End Times. Their first book is A Queer New York, Geographies of Lesbians, Dykes, and Queers. And so now we're gonna, let me shut this off so that we can see everyone here. Thank you all for coming tonight for this very important discussion on lesbian bars. And thank you to Erica, Jack, and Cassandra for joining us. So I thought we were just gonna have a discussion, the four of us, or the three of them, and I'll moderate, and then we're gonna go to a Q&A. So I guess just to start, I watched all three episodes. I thought they were really great and felt that they made a really compelling argument about why lesbian bars, the physical spaces themselves, still matter today. And I was wondering if the three of you could talk about why that you feel they still matter. Erica, would you like to start?
Sure.
Yes.
Yeah, and just to answer Francis's question in the chat, there's no need to have Roku if to watch this series. You can watch on the Roku channel. You can download that, and then the link that Jack sent through that I'll resend. You can just watch it directly through that. So it's just on your browser. So there's accessible ways to watch it, and as Amanda was saying, it's all free. I think that, and I know that Cassandra and Jack will have wonderful answers to this as well. I think that when we started Lesbian Bar Project, it was a reaction to learning how few spaces we had left and that the pandemic could bring that number down to zero. And I think that when I look back at my formative years of finding myself and my identity, and I was privileged enough to come of age and come into my sexuality in around like 2009, 2010, when so many of the older generations and my elders had paved the path so that I could be my unapologetic self. But I was able to find that confidence and find my community and honestly, most of my queer friendships through the bars. And the thought of losing that was incredibly upsetting. And I think that the number of bars that we have in our society that are catered to queer women and non-binary people and trans people is a direct reflection of our society's value of our communities. And if we look at the numbers, even though that they are improving, it is completely disproportionate to how many queer people would need to go and patronize those spaces. So Elina and I decided to take action and do what we do best. The only thing I honestly know how to do is just create stories and showcase the people who are doing the work. And these spaces, as we say throughout the series, are more than just bars. They are safe havens. They're community centers. They're spaces for intergenerational dialogue. And we hope that we showed that.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely got a sense watching the 3 episodes of that. Cassandra, would you like to say why you feel?
Certainly. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. I am truly honored to have you all with us. I first like to just start by paying homage first to the Creator and to the ancestors who came before me, because I feel that I would not be here and able to speak to you from a place of great reference and humility without paying homage to the ancestors, those who never got the opportunity to speak, and maybe in most cases never got the opportunities to enjoy that which I have enjoyed. This is an amazing time in my life. I'm in my 70s, and I am just blown away by the thought sometimes of what happened in Salsa Soul Sisters in the 60s and the 70s and in the 80s. The bar scene for us was not always a pleasant and a wonderful moment. I have experienced a life of discrimination, and I don't wear those discrimination scars on my face, and I hopefully try not to wear them in my heart, but they are there, and I remember them. And I remember not having, going to places in the village, because living in Harlem, you dare not say you're gay and that you are a lesbian, because that was death. There were just not too many places that welcome you. So we went to the village thinking that we had a safe place, to only find out that it was not safe there either. And that in many of the organization, and certainly in the bar scenes, we were not welcome. And it was a very painful experience for most of the women in our organization. And we had to create our own environment, our own places, because when you're in your 20s, although I'm still ready to party in my 70s, so listen, you always want a place to go and be with the people that you love. And you always want to get a move on. You want to do something to let you know that you're still here. And the bars was a place where you could do that. And it wasn't only a place for us to like have a wonderful cocktail, although the drinks were watered down and terrible. And they were not anything that you wanted to pay for, but we paid for them. And I think they gave us the worst ones. But it was more than that. So I have so much to say, but I don't want to take all of the time at this moment. But I do want you to know that the bar scenes for us was not a place where we were welcome. And we had to really protest many of the bars. And I'm sure some of you that are on this line know about Bonnie and Clyde and near the firehouse. Well, that was one place where they counted us. They said, okay, 1, 2, that's it. Now there's 15 of us online. And they said 1, 2. And we said, well, what's up with that? And they would make some of us pay. And we would see some people go in for free, and others, they wanted you to pay. And I have something that I'll share a little later with you from Audre Lorde's. And I know that you all probably have certainly know of her work and her activist actions and activities that she took. But she wrote something about the bagatelle back some time ago. And I'd just like to share a little bit from that a little later. But I think I'll stop there and give someone else an opportunity.
Thanks, Cassandra. And we'll definitely go back to that because it's very interesting to hear. And we often, we have quotes from Audre Lorde on our website that help give insight into the experiences of lesbians of color. But it's always great to hear from more than just, quote Audre Lorde. So we really value what you have to share. And so, Jack, if you'd like to, maybe I should have started with allowing each of you to just maybe kind of say what you'd like to say to open up the evening, or if you would like to answer.
Sure. Sure. Yeah. First of all, thanks to both of you. It's really exciting to be here and be in conversation with you, and so many incredible people in the audience who have made dyke bars and dyke life in New York City and so many other places in the world possible. So what an incredible space to share with all of you. I think we hear a lot about safety. We hear the story of like lesbian bar as a safe space. And we know that that's not the truth all of the time, especially when we think about what's just happened at Club Q. And there's a long history of police attacks and arson, of racism, like Cassandra talks about, and Tongues Untied. There's the quote of counting. My research participants talked about having to show 3, 4, 5, 6 forms of ID. Who has 6 forms of ID, right? As people of color to get into these bars. And so they have a very conflicted history that we need to attend to and understand to make the spaces that we want possible. Roxanne wrote this beautiful book about lesbian potentiality and 70s lesbian utopias through like avant-garde film and sci-fi, and how we have a really narrow view of what lesbian feminism is now. And it's actually, there were so many wildly awesome different possibilities of what it could be. And still with these bars could be. And I think the bars still matter because what other place is called lesbian in the world that you can go to? And how few of them are left to have not even safety, but underneath it, just that moment of recognition, like walking through the door and being like, I am here. Oh my God, I am this. And I see the nods. Yes, I felt it too. Every single time I went to one of these spaces, and the big exhale and the connection. And like Erica said, people don't want us to exist. They don't want lesbian, bi, queer, trans people, the kind of people who show up in these bars and the people who love us and want to support us to exist in this world. And this moment now more than ever, we need these spaces for young people, for old people, for lovely middle-aged people like myself. I really enjoy them. And to come together and to find one another, to imagine these new worlds we need to make in the face of such hatred and violence.
That's true. I guess with the, speaking of the 3 bars in the documentary, Erica, how did you go about selecting these bars and featuring and getting in contact with the owners and the community? What was that process like?
Well, when we set out to start this project in 2020, Elina and I and a couple other people part of the project kind of looked at the list, and we divided it up, and we were like, okay, you'll call these 5 people, you'll call these 5 people. And then one of the first people I spoke to, I think the first bar owner I spoke to was Lisa Canastrasi of Henrietta Hudson, and we connected immediately. And we just, and we had worked with her for all 3 iterations of the project during our PSA in 2020, our short film in 2021. And we really felt it was important and necessary to tell her story because it was also served as a vehicle and a witness to queer history for the past 30 years, since Henrietta Hudson has been open for the past 30 years. And in telling the New York story, we knew that it was crucial to also give voice to the Salsa Soul Sisters, and especially Cassandra Grant, who has been an unbelievable partner and support in this project. So thank you, Cassandra, and to the other sisters. And it was a no-brainer for us to, feature them. And then with the other bars, and Julie, the bar owner in Houston, I think she was probably the second owner I talked to. I got very lucky. I got like two immediately amazing people back to back. And Julie was so incredibly vulnerable. She was candid. She was energetic. She was when I learned that, she of course never calls herself Saint Julie, which is the title of the episode. I started talking to people around her and, just learning how philanthropic minded she was and how she just gives herself to so many other people and causes. It also just kind of was emblematic of our mission of the show, which is that these are more than just bars. And she was such an instrumental leader in her community. And also just, I thought that with Texas, we know that the political climate in Texas is really intense right now. I think that one thing that Julie's story was really, really also important to discuss is the idea that she is sober, and that is part of the bar community, and she's a leader and an owner and sober. And also the environmental factors that we don't necessarily always think about that are infringing on our small businesses. And I think that her story in Houston really touched upon that, the fact that she just was emerging from the pandemic and then the deep freeze happened. And when the energy grid failed in Texas, that was when she considered drinking again after almost 10 years of sobriety, which is completely understandable. There's no judgment on that, but the thing that kept her going, the thing that kept her sober was her community. And what better way to kind of illustrate the importance of these spaces and how not only does she work arduously to save her community also saved her. And with our Phoenix episode, Audrey, we met her and immediately fell in love with her. She told us that she bought her first bar for $40. And when you say a statement like that, we absolutely want to know more. And Audrey is someone who's a mover and shaker. She's a daddy in the best possible definition of that word. And she shows up for her community and she is unapologetically herself. And we also wanted to talk about the Latinx queer community because, especially a lot of the people we featured in that episode, many of them come from pretty traditional conservative Catholic backgrounds, and especially with the integration of some undocumented members of their families, I think it complicates their own queer identity. And that was something that Phoenix really caters to. So we wanted to kind of diversify demographically and story-wise, but all three really just talk about human, intimate, vulnerable stories. And really each episode is about the people.
Yeah, they're really, that's very true. And I was thinking when you mentioned the Phoenix episode and Hispanic women, that they have this space where they may not have, they don't feel comfortable if they're coming from more traditional families. It reminded me of what Cassandra was just saying earlier for Black lesbians at a time when they needed a space to feel safe as well, and did not have that. And like Cassandra, maybe you were alluding to that earlier, what it would be like to want to find a safe space for your community, but then to have to deal with discrimination on top of that. So you could not find it in a way that this bar in Phoenix was that for this Latina community.
Well, I think the bars today have evolved to what we probably were doing back almost in the 70s. And I really think that the bar scene has saved lives. We often think of the bar as a place where people get high and fall out and don't come back. But the issue is that the bars has saved a lot of us, because in the bars, we found family. In the bars, we found purpose. In the bars, we found profession. In the bars, we found art. In the bars, we found talent. I mean, that is where you created the community in the LGBT community. Excuse me for saying community, but it was the community. The bar scene created the artists, all of the artists, the drummers, the dancers, the musicians, the painters, came out of sometimes the bar scene, because that's where they met. While salsa, when I think about it, we had this magazine It was called the Gazette. We met every Thursday religiously. It was almost like church. And one of our writers, Lavinia Pinson, wrote, "We speak of an organization, we have to address ourselves to the question of power. It is always about addressing yourself to the question of power and what are you going to do with your life? The blatant willingness to share meaningful decision-making power with non-whites at the time, for us, gay men and women who have no more evidence that this is an existing place. In view of this, in view of this, the need has existed for us to define ourselves, articulate our concerns, identify our resources, both human and material, and struggle for resolution to our problems." Now, many people don't think as the bar scene as a place where that happened. It happened in our organization, but it also happened in the bar scenes. And we created our own bar scenes because we were discriminated in the bars that we went to. Mm-hmm. So at the time, we had to make our own bar scenes, and we did that in the homes of the people within our organization. And we created the kinds of things that generally happen and what you see now in the bars. And we are excited right now about what's happening in the bars, that it is not the dark, dingy place. It is not the place where we feel totally threatened. When we used to even go to Bonnie and Clyde's, I mean, you felt like sometimes, well, are we safe? You wanted to go on the dance floor, but you were looking at the door at the same time because it wasn't a safe place. And that's both for men and for women. What we experience as women, lesbians, men also experience that in their bars. And it wasn't a safe place. It wasn't a clean place. It wasn't a place that encouraged the kinds of things that eventually grew out of the bar scene. So much came out of those bar scenes and changed the dynamics of the bars, changed the owners of the bars. There were, not the bouncers that were on there that didn't let, certain people in, and that were, mafia run, as we know, initially in the beginning, and where it was about money as opposed to survival. So the bar scene today is about survival and bringing communities together so that they could thrive and they can find themselves and they can feel good and proud about their sexuality. And it isn't always about our sexuality. It is about our life. It is about who we are in the world. And society has to accept us, whether they like it or not. We're here. We were here in the beginning, and we'll be here in the end. And they've got to change and accept some of the things that we feel proud about. And we have to step up to the plate and let them know and show them how we want to be treated.
That was amazing. Can I add to that? Because that was so beautiful. First of all, I was thinking when you mentioned the house parties, I'm also thinking of these amazing rent parties and dollar parties that Black women were throwing in Minneapolis, Detroit, New Orleans. You hear about them in New York, and how these places, why aren't they recognized as dyke bars? Why aren't they lesbian bars to us? Like, why isn't the historic record counting them as equally in this way? Because as you just said, Cassandra, Black women were making their own spaces and making their own worlds. And just the first book on Black queer women's spaces just came out this year, Kemi Adeyemi's Fields Right, about parties. And these are about traveling parties in Chicago. There aren't, like nobody's darling in Chicago. There's so few Black queer women's spaces in history. The only reason there was ever a Black lesbian bar in New York City is there was a financial crisis in 1987. And Crazy Nannies could afford to open on Varick Street. There was a Black lesbian bar on Varick Street. Can you imagine? Right by the McDonald's, which I enjoyed as well after going to Crazy Nannies. So like that these places exist, have like certain moments, and where they can exist and how we decide who counts in the historic record is really important too. And these stories of survival. And you also said that lesbian bars changed us. They also led to the sobriety movement, right? There were so many, especially like during AIDS activism, there's so many people seeing how much hurt we're suffering and coming to the bar and being like, wow, we have a lot of other stuff to deal with. And now, like you talked about Julie Mabry being sober, being a sober bar owner, 10 years now, I hope almost any day now. What a celebration. And the other thing I was thinking about is the only place there have ever been anti-racism protests among lesbians against lesbian spaces, they've been bars. Like Shescape, which was owned by the owner of Bonnie and Clyde's, right? Yeah, Garbo's. And it's about lesbians changing these spaces over time. And that's something from the 80s and the 90s that grew too. So like we're remaking who we are and who we want to be, and realizing that it's not the utopia we need and want. We constantly have to renegotiate and make space for one another and really listen to one another because we're not going anywhere, right? We're going to keep showing up.
You're so right about that. And I'm trying to think of this Filipino sister. And one thing that salsa was back in the 70s was it was a safe place for women of color, not just Black lesbian women, but Latinx women, Native American, Asian women. So we really accepted anyone who came in the door. And there also, we have to think about, it's not just about race, but it's also about class. There's this certain attitude that we have in our society that if you're not of a certain class and if you don't have certain money and you don't look a certain way, you're not welcome. And the bar scene was like that too, because I remember going to the bar scene where the sisters had their shoulder bags and their suits, and they didn't look like some of the other women who wanted to come into the bar, and they weren't treated as kind as the sisters that really were looking the white women that were looking a certain way, as well as those that they accepted in that were sisters. So, the issue is not just about race, but it's race and class. They go together, and we have to really think about that. But there was this Filipino sister, and I forget her name. I'm so sorry. But she opened a bar and she had a restaurant, and she allowed us to come and do poetry and music and dance. And so the scene at the bar became much more than just going and having a drink and getting high. And this is something that we have to also say. And I think that we kind of really stepped the bar up, even in terms of the heterosexual bars, because this was created because we didn't have any place else to go, because they didn't allow us in a lot of other places. So the bar scene became the central community space for the LGBT community. And as it became better, it expanded its outlook and its outreach to the entire community, so that a number of different activities took place in the bar scene and in bar spaces that normally one would not think would be happening in a bar. So the bar has really, as it played out in the film all across the country, it brings the community together on so many other levels. We even have programs for children out of, we created programs where families could be a part of, because where did they go? There were no community centers for families of LGBT communities. We had to create that in our organizations, and those of us that did, visit the bar scenes. So many wonderful things really happen within that, discriminating community.
How do you think, knowing all this history that you're talking about and experience, how do you feel this is useful for people today to know who go to bars? Do you think that it matters that people know what happened in the past? Does it affect people's experiences in bars today? Do you think people care? Do you think they should
I wish
care?
it did. I mean, no one teaches us this any, where can you get this history? And, you have to sit down and read are the nerdy books that academics write, but hopefully I'll write something a lot more accessible the next time for the next book. But yeah, I think it exists. I mean, you go to your website, you have to dig around, and I think people are enthralled and they want to know these stories. It's like the story when Erica said, I bought this bar for $40. It's like, tell me everything, sister. I want to hear it all. Like I want to hear these stories. And Elina Rose is here. So shout out to the Bar Project, which I will, please put a link into the Bar Project, which is an amazing way to walk through the history and be in these bars from all different times and spaces virtually. And it's only up for the rest of the month. So maybe we should all meet there and hang out. I'm going to with my friends. I totally recommend it. But I think the history really matters. I just think people don't know where to get it. What do you guys think?
You're absolutely right. History does matter, because how do you know to exist in your present and what to plan for your future if you don't know your past? You really, the past teaches you, the vision for the present and the future. And we often don't want to take the time to pay, homage to those who have existed in our past. And sometimes the past is very painful. And that alone says to us, I don't want to deal with it, but we must deal with it. We must deal with the pains of the past so that we don't repeat them, so that we create a future for our children and the next generation that will never repeat itself. So learn your past so that your future will be different and the future of others will be different. Never hide the past. And that's what we've done. We've swept the past under the bed to only continue to repeat it over and over again. And a glimpse of it comes up. And then we say, oh, that happened before. It didn't need to happen again. If we would only accept the pain and admit that it wasn't right, and that we need to go beyond that, because we're capable of doing that. We are human and we are capable of doing so much more than we do. And I have faith in everyone that change is possible.
Off of that beautiful statement, I think that so much of our history, our valued history, has been filtered through the lens of whiteness, of socioeconomic advantage, through maleness. And I think that one thing I have really, and so much of our history, so much of our culture, so much of our film, our literature, just everything, obviously. But one thing that I have really taken upon myself in being a filmmaker and a storyteller is doing my part in trying to diversify the way in which we talk about our history and see it through a different lens. And I think that, even in this conversation alone, just what Cassandra and Jack have to teach is, and, I've known these two for a while now, and I feel so honored that someone of, my generation can learn as much as I have from these two and so many others. And as Cassandra said, how can we have an informed future if we don't have an informed past? How can we strive to better our world and better our communities and make the progress that we know we need to make without understanding our past? And I think that filmmaking and storytelling is probably the most, in my opinion, the most immediate way to start to have that conversation.
Yeah, I think there's something really powerful and an emotional connection when you're listening to people and seeing them in the spaces where they're managing a bar, or they're, you're hearing from the people in your videos about how someone went to start working at a bar because that's where that person felt accepted in that community and all that. And so that was really, visual storytelling is really powerful and reaches a lot of people who may not traditionally be interested in history, but they're seeing it in this way and it's accessible to them, which is really great.
Yeah. And I think that one thing that I know that I think the most effective way to dismantle stereotypes or dismantle judgments is through exposure. And when you're in communities that don't have accessibility to queer space, or you might live in a state that isn't LGBTQ friendly, watching something like this is a step in understanding that we're just human beings. And as Jack said earlier, we're not going anywhere and we're everywhere. So I think film is a powerful tool in that way.
Yeah. And adding to that, I was watching it and I was like, why does my heart feel so joyous? And I realized it is the longest I've sat and watched actual lesbians in actual lesbian bars. It is not like the Batgirl version. It is not, what pick a movie, Bound, whatever. It's not some fictitious Drew Barrymore, Whoopi Goldberg version in Arizona, where everyone gets along and hides out in a lesbian bar from the gangsters. Like it's like, yeah, it's so beautiful to be in actual lesbian bars and just to sit and watch people be people.
And getting multiple perspectives, as you said, just not one stereotypical portrayals. It's which is really great. And speaking of that, how Erica and everyone, like looking at Henrietta Hudson in New York in a blue state versus Pearl Bar in Texas in a red state, how do you feel the roles of those two, for example, play out in their communities, given the political climates of both?
Well, in our experience of being at Pearl and being part of the Houston queer community, there is people that drove to that bar 90 minutes each way every day. So they would spend 3 hours commuting because that was the only safe space in, 100-mile radius, potentially, if not more. And I think that the stakes are incredibly high, especially with a state that has criminalized transness and being a supporting, loving parent to trans kids. I think that in New York and Henrietta Hudson, obviously, I don't think that New York City is immune to, and I know we all know this, to discrimination and transphobia and xenophobia and racism. We can all cite that. I do think, however, that when the conversation is more kind of centered around progress and it becomes about how can we be more inclusive and expansive, and it becomes talking about, the fact that she's calling Henrietta Hudson a queer human bar. I think that it's a step forward in thinking about the future of lesbian space and showcasing how the lesbian community has always been made up of non-binary people, trans people, pansexual people, bisexual people, and how we can be less militant and more fluid in terms of how we use the word lesbian. And that's what I really believe. And I think that Henrietta Hudson is part of that, paving the way for a more inclusive future.
Mm-hmm.
I guess you're right about that. And I wanted to just share, this is a piece that Audre Lords wrote back some time ago. Well, this is from the 70s. And she wrote this, a reflection of Black lesbians, a work in progress. I've been standing on this street corner a hell of a long time. And this is back looking in, at the 30s, the 40s and the 50s, but it certainly was again in the 30s. The Bagatelle was a standard women's bar on University between 11th and 12th Street, now an Armenian restaurant, which ordered often watered down drinks and discrimination to lonely women with no social outlet. There was a male bouncer to keep out men and undesirables, which sometimes meant Black, which also meant you had to have ID, check no matter how many times you came, while the white women might come in and didn't have to have anything. So it wasn't easy to be an outsider, no reflection of the crowd of white faces, which didn't ask you or wasn't interested in you or anything you had to say. You were either a macho, a butch, or a femme. It wasn't easy to be a butch because you couldn't really ask a femme anything, or they might break your nose in the alley. And I know most of you might not know about that. In those days, butch and femme could not mix. And even when we were coming up, we kind of broke that barrier. If you either had to be a butch or a femme, and a femme could not dance with a femme, and a butch couldn't dance with a butch. And I know that some of you don't even understand that because you don't even use those words anymore. But this is some of the culture that existed, in the bars at that time. This culture now does not exist and is wonderful in a way because you're able to be, as Erica said, fluid. And those identities don't have to exist. Can you imagine not being able to go up and dance with someone you want to dance with because they were a butch and you were a butch? That would not exist. A butch had to dance with a femme. And certainly Black women might not be able to ask white women to dance because when they left, they, like Audrey said, they would break their nose in the alley. So, and the drinks were watered down. But what we see at Henrietta Hudson now is a beautiful space, a space that is light, a space that makes you feel warm, a space that makes you feel happy, a space that is inviting. Those were not the kind of spaces that you saw. And around the country, we see that. But we still have to fight against the kind of violence that continues to exist in our society that feels that we should not exist when we know that everyone has the right to exist based on who they are. And our places, our bars are places where we all congregate and are places where we can speak our truths and stand up for justice in our society. So in a way, the bar scene has become another social, political space where we have to stand on our truths and make it more of a action. I'm trying to think of what I'm really trying to say in terms of making it more action oriented to the community so that they understand the importance of the bar scenes in our community. I don't know if we ended that.
It also reminded me, Cassandra, when you're talking about Audre Lorde's experiences in your own, you had mentioned earlier that there were bars that your group had protested. Do you remember some of the bars that those were?
Well, all of the bars in the village, we protested at all of the bars because
all of them, yeah.
There was always a quota. There was always only about 2 or 3 Black women could enter those scenes, those bar scenes. And there was always the issue of ID. There was always the issue of a charge. Now, if you're going to charge everybody, but that was not the case. And, we would always go with our friends. When you go to the bars, you go with your crew. So when you could get in, one person could get in, your crew can't get in. Well, that's what it was. So we would go back to our meetings on Thursdays and write up a petition, go back to the bars, and then, try to present our petition and boycott the bars and try to get Black women not to go into the bars. But that's the whole thing, education. And that's what's wonderful about the film, because it educates the general population and the LGBT population in terms of the reality of what's still happening, what has happened, what is happening, and what we look to have happen in our bar scenes. because education is one way of changing the ways that exist in our lifetime that are not good.
Mm.
And until we, continue to work at this through films, movies, books, music, art, whatever, way we can to help people to understand the importance that things cannot remain the way that they were. They have to change for the better.
Yeah, I have been digging around for this Dyke Bars book I'm writing about Dyke Bar art, and there's so little poetry. There's the Pat Parker poem from a while ago where she talks about what lesbian bars are like. And then recently, I don't know if you guys saw that the Canto and Other Stories, what a beautifully titled text, just won the British Poetry Prize of the year, and it's Canto and Other Poems. It's C plus NTO, and it takes place. It's a poetry series, kind of like about in lesbian bars with these invented characters, and it's utterly beautiful. But all of the art that I see, like most of the art about lesbian bars, besides like the few pictures Jeb took in the 70s and 80s. And then De La Grosse Volcano's work in London, all those cool punk pictures we see, the stuff from the Monocle in 1930s, when we like have the precursor to Leah Delaria, the 1930s version of Leah Delaria, the cutest butch in there. And then and now you have like stuff like Edie Fake's Memory Palaces, these imagined ideas of what lesbian bars look like. You have Elina Rose's project. You have Macon Reed's eulogy for the Dyke Bar, like actual installation, and it's just been like this real growth of what lesbian bars could like, what we imagine them to be, and how potent they are, and how they feed us, right? And really critical retellings too in all of these pieces. So they're just the art that's happening too. I just wanted to give a shout out to that, because something's happening now, and it's a lot of it's in the story of the loss. Somebody over here, forgive me, just mentioned the closing of the Lex in San Francisco. And that's what really, I think, started to hit people when the Lex closed in 14, right? 2014, I think. And I wrote a piece in HuffPo, and it trended because people wanted to talk about the last lesbian bar. But I also put a quote in that it wasn't the last lesbian bar. There was another last lesbian bar before that. We're constantly in this narrative, and straight, cis, het, white, colonial, racist society, once able-bodied societies, wants to make sure that we stay in this last narrative, right? This kind of settler time where we're always in the past. And it's constantly being like, actually, we're here, and recreating ourselves. And young people feeling timid to claim that is the hardest thing about making spaces for them that we can hand over to them, making worlds to them to hand over to.
Yeah, I wanted to jump off of that and thank you for that point, because I think that's one thing that we try to really center in our series, is to transcend the narrative of loss, disappearance, and trauma without whitewashing what happened. And I think that we are really trying to look at what's happening currently, and also optimism for the future. In just starting this project, this past year alone, 3 new bars opened, and we get hundreds of messages constantly of people creating new bars and new parties. And, these comments are talking about like just all of these events and pop-ups that are happening. And I think that, as Jack said, that's what, the people filled with hatred and violence want us to be relegated to, is this survival mode. And I think that one thing that we have really, really tried to do is to show not only are we survivors, but we're resilient, and we're here to stay, and we're making impacts in our community.
And you're right. And I also want to give a shout out to people like Barbara Smith, Jewel Gomez, Candace Boyce, Georgia Brooks, Sinister Wisdom, for their work over the years in terms of highlighting the issues, in regard to the bar scene, the joy, the tragedy, the triumphs, the existence. I mean, these are people who speak to the what has been happening, over the years in the bar scenes, and continue to speak to. I mean, those who are gone, but their work is still here. And I'm trying to think of the other sister who was a filmmaker in salsa. I mean, we had so many women in salsa that were brilliant, but the world really doesn't know about them. They don't know about their work, their commitment, their struggles, but we continue to lift them up so that hopefully in the future others will know about them. But there are sisters of all colors that have done work around this whole issue of the bar scene. And I'm glad that we're talking about it because it's more than just the bar. I always want to say the bar and the community, because the bar is the community. And we cannot lose the bars because it makes community, and communities make bars.
Yeah, that's what I like. The owner in the Phoenix episode, she's also a basketball coach, and people who she was their coach. It was like 20 years ago that maybe, or 10 years ago that she was their coach, but they still have this strong connection to her. And as Erica said, Julie at the Pearl Bar needing the strength of her community. So it's kind of a reciprocal thing that is really moving. And when you contrast that to 50, 60, 70 years ago, when these were mafia run bars, the dynamic was very different. And it's interesting how the environments are impacted by the community. The bar can be the same building over the course of 70 years, but the community is what shapes it. And I think that's what was so powerful about the series. I just want to take a moment. If people have questions, please leave them in the chat because we'll move to Q&A soon. Anything you'd like to ask, please do. But keeping with that, I would say with community and the evolving nature of the lesbian bar, how would you say, when you look at community today versus in the past, how that has impacted your experiences or what you've seen from bars across the country?
As a panelist, you're asking us that? How has the bar scene impacted our experiences?
How today, how it has evolved. I mean, Cassandra, I suppose, from when you were in your 20s, as you said, and the nature of it was very different. For, I guess, a young lesbian of color today, I mean, having that community of Salsa Soul in the past was so important. Do you feel a group like Salsa Soul would still be beneficial to young lesbians of color today? Or do you feel that bars are inclusive now to the point where communities can be formed within those spaces?
Well, I think it's both, because I think that certainly organizations are important to the growth and development of an individual. I feel that I am who I am because I had an opportunity to be among such strong Black women, like, people like Maua Flowers. Many of you may not know, she would say on any given day, I couldn't tell whether they were discriminating against me because I was a woman, a Black woman, a lesbian, or an elder. And, you learn so much, from people like that. And you look at someone like that came out of salsa, like Dr. Marjorie Hill. She was Dinkins' first LGBT person to represent New York City. She came out of salsa and she was on his administration. So organization-wise, and we started a program, we started Kwanzaa in our organization. And this is our 49th year where we will be having a Kwanzaa celebration for the LGBT community. And it's about family. It's about creating family. And we were not able to just support a woman, we were supporting families. Where did families get? When you leave your parents' house, no one wants to admit that you're gay and you have no place to stay, where do you go? Well, they came to Salsa, and someone in that group took them in and made family for them. Someone helped someone go back to college. Someone helped someone go into a non-traditional field like electrician or plumbing, because they couldn't get a job as a secretary or a teacher because they were not going to dress like that. And they had a passion for plumbing and electrical work. So organizations are always important to growth and development of an individual. It just changes. The dynamic of the organization needs to change and be current and present for this day and age. The bar scene has to be there because we have to socialize. You find your husband, your wife, your partner, you dance all night, you have a good time. You know, when you have all these political issues, you can't just bottle them. You got to let it go somewhere. You got to have some place where you could go and have a drink and enjoy yourselves and hear music, you know. And we supported a lot of music that came out of the culture. A lot of women music was supported in the bar scene. I mean, let's think of some of the artists that really, I mean, the gay community really made their music happen. I'm sure Donna Summers. I mean, come on. These are people that the gay community, Patty, Nona Hendricks, I mean, Patti LaBelle, gay scene, that gay community put them on the map too. Mm-hmm. And they sang our music. They made us feel good about who we are. They dressed like us. They helped us look like us. And some of them were gay, you know? So we have to think about, you know, the bar scene is more than the bar and a drink. It's about life. It's about society. It's about what you do, you know, in the world. And you have to have some place where you go and meet community in every community. And unfortunately, here in New York, I'm saddened by the fact that we don't have that many bars of color in our communities. And it's for a lot of reasons. It's not just about racism. You know, it's about economics too. You know, we can hardly find an apartment, let alone try to open up a bar. So, I mean, you have to really think about these kinds of things. So I would say it's both. You have to have organization, and you also have to have places where you go and enjoy your life and you experience good times. When I think back about having a good time, I think about all the bars, whether some of them were, you know, it was discrimination, but it was also a good time at the same time. You have to balance it.
Is your mom calling? Like my mom called right before this.
Actually, you know who was calling me was Julie Mabry.
Yeah, even better.
She could sense that I was talking about her.
That's beautiful.
I could put her on speaker and I'll spare her.
Thinking about
No, go ahead, Jack.
Just your question was, I was thinking, Amanda, about how bars have changed. And one thing going back to the Gwendolyn Stiegel thesis was I didn't really know much about tea rooms. And Jonathan Ned Katz has just written this amazing book about Eve Adams, and, you know, who opened a tea room because, you know, women couldn't have a bar in New York. And then I was over at the Schwinboden Lesbian Archive, and the coordinator, the head of the archive, puts the Berlin Lesbian Guide in front of me from 1920s that Magnus Hirschfeld wrote the introduction to, right? And so you actually start thinking about how different geographies and politics and economies are shaping our lives. We have this really collapsed notion of what lesbian, queer, bi, trans spaces are over time. Right, we don't know that in the 1920s, New York was not the place to be, as Eve Adams is going to get kicked out of the country and sent to the camps, right, to die there. So, kind of how things have changed over time. You know, I didn't know that the most lesbian bars we ever had in New York City were in the 1990s, and that number kind of dwindled. And a huge part of it, we haven't talked as much about trans people yet. But a big part of that is, you know, and I write about it in A Queer New York, is that you had a lot of trans, you suddenly, we don't have socialized medicine. So Callum Lord was giving out testosterone. And I remember hanging out. There's anybody else at Doc Holliday's dancing on the bar with me? No, on the Lower East Side. Anyway, so I was there, and it was a women's night, and I had gone away for a couple months for work, and I came back, and this a young femme was crying, "Is my ex-girlfriend now my ex-boyfriend? Am I still a lesbian?" Right? And it's this turn of the century breakdown about like, what does it even mean to be a lesbian? What does it mean to be a woman, to be a man? What is gender? And we like knew from Judith Butler it was a construct, but we didn't really understand what that meant. We're still all figuring that out. And so nobody wanted to go out to these bars, and then you have prices on property skyrocket. And so Stuart had a question somewhere about what is the advice for two lesbians, who want to start a bar in New York City? Have amazing financial backing for, to be able to afford a space, and the coolest event planner of all time. Yeah. I mean, I remember Caddyshack was awesome. Caddyshack had that epic space on 4th Avenue in Brooklyn before it was a series of box stores. And it just the event planning, didn't hold together. And the downstairs was pumping and awesome. It was racially segregated by music and people, and upstairs was dead. And it eventually wound up having a straight night to hold on. And so how do we think about like these different spaces and where they are at different times, and how they fall apart and how they come together has a lot to do with these different identities. And yeah, just want to bring trans people into this too. And now I think it's just really common to see trans people in these spaces, especially trans women who were really kept out of lesbian bars, at least in New York City. A lot of them showed up in the 1980s and were told, absolutely, you cannot be here. You cannot be in our spaces. And horrible things were said to them. And so it's recreating these spaces anew with a different way of approaching transness.
When you were talking, I was thinking about this place called the Ballroom. I don't know if anybody remembers that. It was a beautiful space. Oh my gosh. I mean, you really felt like you were a person. And that's the other thing. The kind of places that we create, we have to make sure that people feel like people, because we as a LGBT community have been relegated to those small, danky, tiny, sorry looking places. And they call that, a bar or a space for us, where we should have beautiful places to go, with a lot of light, a lot of color, a lot of space, room. And maybe we need to speak to the legislators about it, because discrimination is discrimination. And we can't afford the kind of spaces that it's almost like, we talk about in the Black community about access. Because we have not had access to something for centuries, years and years and years and years, there has to be something done in order for us to somehow have some kind of equality and justice in that area. Certain areas like education, housing, healthcare. Socialization is just as important. To be able to socialize and enjoy yourself in a safe and beautiful and welcoming and comfortable space. And if we cannot afford that kind of space, then why can't it be subsidized so that that space can exist for the community? So sometimes we need to think about the kinds of things that we need to speak to legislators about based on the kind of discrimination that has taken place over the years. And I'm ready for a bill.
Yeah.
Create the first one. There are a lot of things that we need bills for, but it's not, and when I think of the youth, I think about the young people and having a safe and beautiful, comfortable, enjoyable space where music and art and dance can take place.
Yeah. Can I pick up on this question? Oh, Erica, go. And then Jessica has a really great question.
No, I just wanted to quickly add that, the fact that the Equality Act has not passed, and the fact that what the Senate just voted on in terms of protecting marriage equality had to make many major concessions. I think that it's proving that we have to be the determiners of our own political and social safety. And with that, the onus is really on us to be leaders in inclusion. And off of what Jack said, just even looking at some of the comments on when we posted the Lesbian Bar Project, and the historic sites put like their joint Instagram post together, some of the comments on that post alone were extremely violently turfy. And I think that it was really, really upsetting. And that was like members of our community were doing that. And I think that because we have no political protection, we have to put it upon ourselves to eradicate that in our community. And, even just going through some of the comments, like, I was getting into like Instagram battles with people, and I was like, well, it's worth it because like, I don't want any of this language on this. And that's not what this project stands for. And I know that that's not what any of the bars that we work with stand for. So I just wanted to point that out and say that because we have nothing, in terms of protection, we just have to fight for our own safety.
So
Thanks
important.
for that, Erica. Yeah, thank you. And I'm sorry you have to do that. I'm sorry we all have to do that. I get those comments all the time. So
yeah, I'm sure you get them all the time, and it sucks.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Jessica asked about, were these spaces ADA compliant? I think most lesbian bars are struggling to get by. I don't know how many of them are. I know that is it As You Are Bar in DC is 100%. Yeah, and there was a huge thing quite recently about a league of their own not being ADA compliant, and some of the staff there not letting someone in a wheelchair go up to a higher floor, even though they had friends supporting them doing that. And As You Are Bar is opened up ADA compliant, and they're a new space doing that. But I had disability in lesbian bars is not something that's been written about very much. I had people in my research talk about having lost most of their hearing and not be able to go to these spaces. They can't hear anyone, or somebody has epilepsy and the music are strobing all over the place, or people who had asthma, because you could smoke in New York City bars until the late 2000s. And it was disgusting. You would come home, go get totally naked, put yourself in the shower, put your clothes in a bag. This is the worst moment to remember of New York City lesbian bars, and then feel them and then take them to the laundry because it was so vile. But people with asthma couldn't go to these spaces. So if we think about disability in so many different ways, or wanting to, like, people who are extroverted or introverted. I saw an ad on Lex where someone's like, I'm never going to meet anyone. I just want to hang out with my cat at home. And they're like, I know I'm young. And I was like, that's actually a sexuality, friend. Go look for you. Just, look for your cat friend. You're going to have a great life. It's okay. But I think, like how we think about what's accessible and what these spaces can be. And it really shuts a lot of people down from feeling like they belong there, right? Race, class, disability, generation, age. Lesbian bars never carded until the barcode came back on the back of most lesbian bars didn't card. Most gay bars didn't card, right? Young people used to go in there, not get served. They would know not to get to ask for alcohol. That came up in all of my participant stories. Like, I knew I didn't want the bar to be in trouble. I just wanted to go in. And they would hang out there and they would find community. But until we got that barcode on the back that scanned people in, people were not carding. And so it was a totally different generational scape about who could be there. And now you have young people who don't have that experience or don't even imagine that they could be in one of those spaces and wait till they're 21.
Mm.
We have a question from Rowan here about what are some of the most important or impactful things we can do to support lesbian bars other than being a patron?
Encouraging people to go. And also, voting for politicians that are supporting small businesses and legislation that is
there you go.
small businesses and community funds to keep small businesses open, and for as we were talking about in terms of opening, like it is, especially in our coastal cities, it is exorbitantly expensive to open any of these spaces. So we need, and there's no political assistance in that. So, I mean, it's interesting kind of like talking to a lot of the bar owners during the pandemic, and the fact that the PPP loan was like the first time in this generation that we had sweeping government financial support, and that was had to be in like the pits of a pandemic. So I think supporting policy that is really empowering many different types of people to open safe spaces is crucial. And also being a patron and showing up. And many of the bars, as Jack mentioned, as you are in DC, we feature them in our film in 2021. They're absolutely wonderful. And they have a cafe open during the day. So they're not as necessarily alcohol, kind of dependent. And many of these bars are open during the day and are more accessible for different times of day that people can go and patronize them.
Well, I certainly support the legislation, because I know it is now time. One is that you start, at a very basic level, which is you do it yourself, and you try to, maintain something as long as you can. And then you see that you cannot maintain it. You reach out to the community, and then the community maintains it. And they maintain it for a while, and they start struggling. And then you see that they can't maintain it. Then you have to see where, the government has to come in and support you in your efforts to maintain a quality of life that becomes critically important. And we're now talking about the area of mental health. And we have to connect mental health with the issues that socialization is possible. Where do you socialize? Well, we have the LGBT Center, but that's only one center in the entire city of New York. Well, we have a couple of organizations, but we could still have funds to support areas and activities that really supports communities that have not had that kind of support in the past, wherein others have had access and funding to do that kind of thing, not from the government, but they have had that kind of access because they have not been discriminated against. So we have, the research, and we have the study, and we have to put that before the legislators and those who are, in positions of power to make changes. So those sometimes there's a campaign that has to come together. A couple of organizations come together in support of what can we do in a particular area to increase what we need to see happen. So it does take a little manpower, but I think we need to be beyond what we saw in the 70s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and look towards, well, what should be happening down the line 5 or 10 years.
And it's a totally different political landscape to conceptualize how we should organize or think about things and who we're organizing with. Yeah, 100%. Rachel's comment was great about getting involved with local civic organizations too. And also making the Dyke Bar, whatever it is, or queer party your own. Bring your Scrabble game or your quiet reading club or your Stitch and Bitch and do the thing you want to do to make it your own. Don't go and say, I think this is one of the things that I heard a lot from my participants. I went and I didn't like it and it was awful. And I'm like, how many times did you go? Once. And that was their experience of that lesbian bar, right? And whatever happened that moment, who flirted with them or not, if they went to the Click Club that one time and someone tried to dance on their face, it was I'm never going back. I'm totally scared, right? To go there again, versus other people who kept going and persisting. And so there's a lot of people who go that one time and don't know they're whatever they bring makes it that way, right? That we're producing these spaces together. So I think telling people that and saying that again and again and taking action at so many levels is important too.
Well, we have a few minutes left, and I just wanted to mention that a few people have asked in the chat if there's a way to save the chat and share it for all the resources. I have to defer to Christiana, or I don't know if there's, Christiana, do you know if there's a way?
Sure, we'll make sure to save a copy, and tomorrow as our post-event thank you, we'll include a copy so that everybody can have one. Thank you for that question.
Thank you.
Okay, great. I wanted to make
Awesome.
sure because it definitely came up. Trying to like watch the chat and then listen at the same time is definitely a skill, but that I'm working on.
And I wanted to give a shout out to my friend Gregor Matson's coming out with Who Needs Gay Bars, and there's a huge section on lesbian-owned gay bars in that book, and he shows up. He's done a lot of research into these spaces. He's fantastic, and you know, if anyone bought Gay Bars by Jeremy Atherton, it's like, where is the lesbian? Where is the lesbian? So you know, like it's nice to have a book where we figure prominently, and you know, talking about bars that are so far that any gay person can even find a gay space. They show up, they take their family phone, download Grindr, get everyone's numbers there, and delete the app as if it never existed, and then carry those numbers around with them to have community. Like talking about very different spaces, it's really fantastic. So
Yeah.
and
Jack,
yeah.
there's actually only 3 mentions of lesbians in that book because I have a digital copy of it, and I just
oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Oh, I read it. I put a lot of stuff in it, so I have not read the final version, so I can't wait to see. Well, there's the women owned and the lesbian owned gay bars as a section, but I can't wait to see this. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
The gay bar, the Jeremy Atherton book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That one. Oh, there are 3 mentions of lesbians. I also underlined them a lot. Yeah. And I'm writing a book about dyke bars. So queer spaces for the end times, climate change and digital pandemic, everything is coming at us. So yeah.
So I guess, and just wrapping up, would each of you like to just kind of say some last words about the Lesbian Bar and your thoughts on it as we close out this very engaging evening? I know a lot of people enjoyed in the comments.
I just want to thank Jack and Cassandra so much. It's an honor to call you guys friends. And honestly, I'm just glad I get to hang with you guys. And what I'm doing is like so small in comparison to what you've both have done. So thank you so much. And thank you so much for the NYC LGBT Historic Sites for putting on this event. I'm really, really appreciative. I guess please watch the show. Please tell your friends to watch the show. Candidly, we have not been approved for a greenlit for a second season yet. So if we get the numbers that we need, we'll get a second season. So if you can help support us and watch it and tell all your friends, that would really mean a lot. And please support and educate yourselves on the Salsa Soul Sisters and buy all of Jack's books.
I just gave my book away free too, because queer history should be free. So, you know, if you can't afford it, it's great if you can buy it. But, you know, who's going to make book money on an academic book? Like, let the lesbians know history. And thank you. And learn about Salsa Soul Sisters. There's not enough written about Salsa Soul Sisters. Maybe you're going to be the one to write a research about them and all the groups I mentioned who need so much more history written about them. And that's New York. Let's leave New York City, right? There's so many other places that need that history too. But God, New York needs it so much because we keep telling the same stories and people keep coming to visit Stonewall. And if we can blow their minds about how rich and complicated the city is, what a great idea.
Oh, it is
right?
complicated. In fact,
it's so complicated.
I didn't even talk about the bars in Harlem and what would happen if we would go there. But it would take all night to talk about all these things because you kind of remember them as you go along. But again, Christina, Amanda, Ken, Erica, and Jack, thank you all. And everyone who stayed with us this evening. I am so absolutely grateful that you found what we were saying interesting enough to stay with us and to listen to us. I am just elated by your presence and your willingness to hear us out. There is so much to really talk about. You know, as you get older, you have so much to say and nobody wants to listen.
You were amazing, Cassandra.
I think you have a very welcome audience here. Yeah.
They said, here she goes again with that story. And I used to say that about my parents because they used to tell the same story over and over. And I said, oh my gosh, what's wrong with them? And now I'm doing the same thing. What?
Thank God we want to listen.
Good to reiterate.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Yeah.
But it has been I would never have wanted to live anyplace else but in New York. I'm telling you, as ridiculous and sometimes as terrible as it may have been, New York has been amazing. And the work that we did in the 60s and the 70s, and we continue to do, just lightens my heart and lifts me up in ways that I could never imagine. And I just stand on the shoulders of the ancestors. And I pray that we make them proud each time we decide to do something. And all I'd like to say to everybody is just do something. I don't care what you do, but do something to make a difference so that those that come behind us get to enjoy something that we didn't get to enjoy. And I love you all from the bottom of my heart. And I hope that love will rule the world one of these days. I don't know when, but I won't.
And watch the Roku series. It'll make you feel good.
Yes.
And it'll keep this feeling with you. Yeah. Thank you guys.
Thank you, everyone.
For a second,
Thank you, Amanda.
Happy holidays.
Thank you all. Thank you all so much for this evening.
Yeah, and check out the NYC LGBT Historic Sites Project because it's amazing. The work they do is incredible. It is like mind-blowing how they have changed LGBT history for the United States. So check it out. You'll be heartened. And I learn something from them all the time. Thank you guys for all the work you do.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
Thank you.
Have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Love
Bye,
everyone.
everyone.
Take care.
Blessings.